Hi everyone, Jason here from SpiritualBabies.net. You've joined us this week for another Haftarah Halfhour. This is the Haftarah show for Shimini, and we're joined as we are every week by our guide through the Torah and through the Tanakh, Rabbi Joshua Neely. Welcome back, Rabbi Neely.
Oh, good to be here. Always fun to be on the journey.
We are going to jump straight in because there's an awful lot of text in this week, and we're reading from 2 Samuel 6:1 through 7:17. I think it's worth, though, if you can give us kind of an update of what's happening on this storyline and where we are at the moment with David.
So David has risen finally and undeniably to be the United Kingdom king of all of Israel. He has conquered Jerusalem and he has set up his central offices there and built his palace there. And as such, it is sort of time to consolidate the religious center of Israel to there as well. And so that means bringing the ark up to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is up from everywhere else, more or less, in Israel. And so that's where we sit.
All right. So chapter 6. David again assembled all of the picked men of Israel, 30,000 strong. Then David and all the troops that were with him set out from Baalim of Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, to which the name was attached, the name Lord of Hosts enthroned on the cherubim. Which is a reference to what it looked like, right? On the top of this ark,
Exactly.
You've got these two cherubim figures. They loaded the ark of God onto a new cart and conveyed it to the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, and Abinadab's sons, Uzzah and Ahio, and I am looking down there to make sure I'm saying it okay, guided the new cart. They conveyed it from Abinadab's house on the hill. Uzzah walking, it says in brackets. So I'm assuming that when I see something in brackets in the text, it's not in the text that we're reading from, but it's assumed, so they put that in.
Right. It's inferred from the text, but it doesn't exist as written there in the text.
Okay, so Uzzah walking alongside the ark of God and Ahio walking in front of the cart. Meanwhile, David and all the house of Israel danced before the Lord to the sound of all kinds of cypress wood instruments, with lyres, harps, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. I'm not sure I know what a sistrum is. I'm pretty sure I know what a timbrel is, but a sistrum, no.
I'm trying to remember as well. Ancient instruments is not my forte. That sounds like a wonderful question for Rabbi Google, who will probably be able to provide many different images of what people think a sistrum looked like.
It sounds like a medical issue, doesn't it? Like a system.
If you got a sistrum, you better get that checked out.
Right. So if you viewers know what a sistrum is, please post a link underneath and let us know. So the Ark of the Covenant's been put into a cart, and amongst what looks like a really great street party, they're bringing it up towards Jerusalem.
And there's only one major problem with this, which is it's not supposed to be on a cart. The Torah is very, very clear of how the ark is meant to be conveyed. And it's always meant to be carried by the Levites on the poles and not on a cart. So even though it sounds perfectly fine and reasonable, there's already a major mistake being undertaken right here. And this is really going to become a theme throughout the whole rest of the Haftarah, which is something that sounds fine, or at first read doesn't seem problematic at all, but maybe would be the kind of thing I might think to do, is not at all what was supposed to be done. And in fact, we had expressed and clear commandments not to do such a thing in the first place.
But when they came to the threshing floor of Nakon, Uzzah reached out for the ark of God and grasped it, for the oxen had stumbled. The Lord was incensed at Uzzah, and God struck him down on the spot for his discretion, and he died there beside the ark of God. David was distressed because the Lord had inflicted a breach upon Uzzah, and that place was named Perez Uzzah, as it is still called. So one of the ox tripped over, and the cart probably took a stumble to the side. And thinking he was doing the right thing, this guy reached out to steady the Ark of the Covenant, but you're not supposed to touch it.
Well,
And
it's not even a question of thinking he was doing the right thing. It was probably almost instinctual. You know, you're walking along the side of the ark or the cart to keep it, steady. And any cart, if it begins to tip, you're going to reach up to help make sure the load doesn't fall out. He probably didn't even think, should I or shouldn't I steady the load? It was just, oh, look, a bump. Hand goes up. And bam.
it's a hard call, isn't it? I mean, I'm thinking to myself, all right, given that knowledge, like supposing you were on the other side of that cart, this guy's just died. You have to deal with that, and then but the ark still has to get to where you want it to go. So 3 days later, you hit another pothole. Should I just let it fall out? I mean, it must have been very difficult for the people there.
Well, exactly, as we're going to see in the next section. David calls an immediate halt to everything because of what happened here. So you're absolutely right that for the outside observer for what's going on, this is, I think the term you used was pretty hardcore and would make you extremely reluctant to want to get anywhere near this thing because of what just happened. So one thing I have to point out, because it's often sort of, not just here, but throughout biblical readings, is really taken by those that attack the faithful at all, atheist groups, or militant atheists and such, as well as by people who are within the religion and use it almost as a bludgeon against followers. When it said that God was incensed, when it says that God's wrath was kindled, that doesn't mean God suddenly got annoyed. Right? I can't stress this enough because it comes up over and over again in arguments with those that attack Judaism or any faith that talks that is based upon the text of the Tanakh. God doesn't have mood swings. This is not like you getting upset because someone touched your mint Star Wars figure and has ruined the value. What do you mean you took it out of the wrapper? This is not God throwing a fit. This is not God getting angry because he's really, really upset that someone touched his stuff. When it says that God's anger flares out, it doesn't mean that God's emotional state has changed, because God's emotional state doesn't change. God is unchanging. That's one of the cardinal features of understanding what God is. What it does mean is that Uzzah acted in a way that would immediately and instantly receive a result according to the laws of God's universe. We describe that as anger because were it to be a human king, it would be the same as if the human king were angry and implemented the harshest punishment for one of their laws. This is not a human king, therefore there isn't an actual emotion, although the poetry, perhaps in the ancient world, helped people relate better, since they were used to the idea of angry kings. But we should not think of God as being an angry king. He reached out and touched in a way that should not have happened, and he received the full force of the effect. This is exactly the same kind of thing, which is why it's here as the Haftarah, that happened to Nadav and Avihu, the two sons of Aaron, when they brought the Eish Zara, they brought the strange fire into the inauguration of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. It isn't that God suddenly goes, whoa, I didn't know you were going to do that, and gets angry and smashes them. It's they hit a tripwire that is hardwired into the universe. And when that happened, the result happens as well. And we see the effect, which is an immediate cessation. Because all of a sudden people are thinking, well, wait a minute. So you mean we can't just do what we think is okay? Because good intentions won't protect us in the worst situation. Well, I guess we better rethink this. And that's a very important message that's being given both in the Torah portion as well as here, which is there are rules and there are limits that are built into the universe. And even though you may think what you're doing is fine, if you're not being careful enough to really ask what is fine, you may inadvertently go over one of those, even with the best of intentions, and the result will be inevitable. and don't blame it on a vengeful God. Blame it on you being careless in your initial setup, which is why the fact that David began this in such a way is so problematic. When the king sets out to create the situation, he creates the perfect opportunity for someone to do something with the right feeling that nevertheless is going to have this automatic result.
As you were talking there, I was thinking, so God's kind of like a computer, you know, everything's running at the same time. It doesn't have emotions. It's just going to respond differently depending on how it's programmed. And I thought, no, that's not right. It's not programmed. It's like a house and everything. There's different rooms in the house. It doesn't mean the room changes just because your emotions changed. You know, stick a screwdriver in a power outlet, you're going to get zapped. But God's not a house either. And then I realized it was completely futile. And then we should just move on, because the whole point is we can't ever comprehend what God is like. We can learn a little bit about what He's like, and we can definitely learn what He's not like. So I can say happily He's not like a computer or a house, and we'll move on.
Very true. And we can also do our best to try to learn from what God has told us of what's the right way to live in this world. And that may still leave us very far short from understanding God in God's own essence. But it will help us live a much better life in this world, and we'll definitely keep away from these tripwires.
David was afraid of the Lord that day. He said, "How can I let the ark of the Lord come to me?" So David would not bring the ark of the Lord to his place in the city of David. Instead, David diverted it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and his whole household. I'll bet he did. I'll bet. I'll bet they kept well clear of that room. Can you imagine? We've had a bit of an accident on the way, and we need somewhere to store this box. So really, what happened? Well, I'm not really happy telling you what. No, I want to know what happened. Well, someone touched it and they died. Yeah, you can put that over there. We'll stay over here. It was reported to King David, "The Lord has blessed Obed-Edom's house and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God." Therefore David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David amid rejoicing. When the bearers of the ark of the Lord had moved forward 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fatling. Are we to assume now that he's not taking it in an ark? I mean, if they're moving forward 6 paces, it sounds like they're walking, not...
In typical Tanakh fashion, the situation has changed, and the author doesn't draw your attention to it because he sort of assumes you're reading carefully. So exactly right. When we get into verse 12, David now realizes that he was right to believe that the ark should be in Jerusalem because the ark is a source of blessing, but he just needs to do it the right way. And lo and behold, by the end of the verse, by the end of verse 13, we find out people are carrying it, and they are walking, and that means it's being done the way it was supposed to be done.
David whirled with all his might before the Lord. David was girt with a linen ephod. Whirled, is that dancing?
Yep, exactly right.
That's great.
And his wife is going to call him on it.
That's lovely, all right. Thus David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouts and with blasts of the horn. As the ark of the Lord entered the city of David, Michal, daughter of Shaul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and whirling before the Lord, and she despised him for it. Because he had the moves and she didn't have the moves?
Well, no, I mean, she's going to go on to explain it a little bit more in her own words. But remember, she's a princess. She's the daughter of a king, and she believes basically that it's unbecoming.
They brought in the ark of the Lord and set it up in its place inside the tent which David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and offerings of well-being before the Lord. When David finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and the offerings of well-being, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts. He distributed among the people, the entire multitude of Israel, man and woman alike, to each a loaf of bread, a cake made in a pan, and a raisin cake, and all the people left for their homes. That's very nice. I'm racking my brain. I don't think there are many other instances where there's a celebration and everyone gets a doggy bag.
I'd like to believe this is the beginning of sending people home with party favors. Thank you for coming. It was so nice you could join us. Thank you. Here's your bag. Thank you for coming. And as you stand at the door and the nation leaves. But it really is a part of what we see throughout the sacrificial and holiday services. That when we celebrate, we are supposed to eat and rejoice together in this celebration. It's not just a question of sitting and singing songs and doing hymns and things like that. It's supposed to gladden us all the way through, and that includes our stomachs.
David went home to greet his household, and Michal, daughter of Shaul, went out to meet David and said, "Didn't the king of Israel do himself honor today, exposing himself in the sight of the slave girls of his subjects, as one of the riffraff might expose himself?" Wow. David answered Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me instead of your father and all his family and appointed me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will dance before the Lord and dishonor myself even more and be low in my own esteem. But amongst the slave girls which you speak of, I will be honored." So to her dying day, Michal, daughter of Shaul, had no children. Ooh. Why was she that bothered about him?
This is a husband and wife talking, a king and queen, really, at this point. And it's also the daughter of Saul talking to the son of Jesse. Remember, David, in the view of the family of Saul, usurped the throne. That was certainly Saul's position, that David should not have become king. I mean, obviously God had a different idea, but Saul was not happy about being replaced, was not happy about his son Jonathan not going to the throne. And even though you would think that Michal might be pleased that her husband became king rather than her brother, there is definitely still an arrogance to her that David wasn't really meant to be king. And when she sees him behaving this way, she is very, very shrewish in her response to him. And he responds quite sharply as well by saying, "You know, your dad got replaced by me, which means I think I'm a better judge of how to serve God than you and your family are." Because it was an attitude like that that got your dad bumped. Because maybe your dad thought a little too much of himself. If you remember back from the story of the Amalekites, Saul is off erecting statues to himself, monuments to his victory, rather than doing what God has asked. And here we see David doing exactly the opposite. He is humbling himself before God in the eyes of everyone, because he wants to set that example, that the entire nation should recognize that the king too is humble before God. And you're right, his answer is glorious. And it also shows a good lesson learned from the unfortunate incident with Uzzah, with the ark, that David recognizes that he can't just treat God as a extension of the state, as part of the kingly glory procession. So rather than escorting the ark in all of his regal finement or finery, he puts himself down at the lowest level. And dances with the simplest of clothing to show that before God he is just one of the people.
Are we to read in verse 23? It says that so to her dying day, Michal, daughter of Shaul, had no children. Is that because they fell out in a really big way? It doesn't say that God did made sure she didn't have children, and I can't help wonder if her not having kids is also kind of going to reflect on David somewhat. I mean, every king wants to have lots of children.
Well, it's actually more specifically, she has no more children. Yes, it is a little ambiguous of whether or not this means that David and her never get together again, or whether this means that she becomes infertile at this point on, in some form of retribution. I think you could make a good argument for either case.
When the king was settled in his palace and the Lord had granted him safety from all the enemies around him, the king said to the prophet Nathan, "Here I am, dwelling in a house of cedar, while the ark of the Lord abides in a tent." Nathan said to the king, Go and do whatever you have in your mind, for the Lord is with you. Yeah, so I mean, we know that so far anyway, right? David pitched the tent outside, and now he's feeling kind of maybe a bit guilty, or that he hasn't done enough, or that God deserves a bigger box.
Well, pretty much the latter. You know, it's coming back to the same idea that happened at the beginning, right? God didn't tell him to move the ark to Jerusalem. David sort of thought, you know, this would be a good idea. God didn't tell him, obviously, to carry it on a cart. David thought, well, you know, a cart is better than being schlepped on shoulders. He thought it would be a good idea. Obviously, that decision wasn't so good. Here, David's going, you know, I've built this palace of cedar for myself, you know, beautiful and glorious. God's just in a tent. Isn't it time we upgraded for God too? Because, I mean, wouldn't God prefer to be in at least a good structure as the king? Because I don't want to make it look like I've got better than God, because we know who the real king is. And again, he's making his own judgment. He's making his own judgment with the right intentions, but there's going to be an issue here. Now, even on the surface of it, the prophet Nathan seems to think this is okay, that David is acting with the right intention. But we're going to see that Nathan has a vision which says, not so much.
I can just ask, because I'm kind of intrigued by that first line. When the king was settled in his palace and the Lord had granted him safety from all the enemies around him, I start then to wonder whether David specifically brought the ark to him in Jerusalem because he felt it would offer him some extra protection against those enemies.
Well, certainly Jerusalem would become the most secure part of the entire nation. I suppose it could be read that way. I mean, when it says granted safety from all the enemies around him, it means that David, who had spent his entire career fighting, finally came to a moment of peace when the nation was no longer at war, at least for this moment. And the reflection of whether or not we turn to God in peace, the same way we turn to God in war, you know, the old saying, there are no atheists in a foxhole. It's actually very telling in David's favor that rather than only thinking about God when there is war going on, he thought about God when it became peaceful. And in fact, in some ways, he thought better of God. You know, during the war, he never thought, let's build something good for God, but he did think, let's build a palace for myself. But now in peace, he is doing the right thing by wondering if this is a good plan. And he's doing the right thing by talking to the prophet as well, rather than just keeping his own counsel and building it without any consultation. It's just not going to be quite the answer he was expecting.
But that same night the word of the Lord came to Nathan, Go and say to my servant David, Thus says the Lord, Are you the one to build a house for me to dwell in? From the day that I brought the people of Israel out of Egypt to this day I have not dwelt in a house, but have moved about in a tent and tabernacle. As I moved about wherever the Israelites went, did I ever reproach any of the tribal leaders whom I appointed to care for my people Israel? Why have you not built me a house of cedar?
It's you know, to use the old joke of you know, the Jewish guilt, you know, the son that comes home and says, look, Mom, Dad, I've bought you a new BMW. Like, did we ask for a BMW? Have I ever complained that my Oldsmobile wasn't good enough that I should have a BMW? What makes you think that I need a? I mean, it's very nice that you want to give us a BMW, but the car's been good to us for 15 years. We didn't need a new car. You could have spent your money on something else. It's kind of, you know, I never asked for this. I mean, it's very nice that you think of me and want to do nice, but have I ever said I was unhappy with the Mishkan? After all, I'm the one who ordered its construction and gave the specific details of it. So there is definitely a little pushback on this by saying it's a good idea, but you still don't get me. You still don't understand what I am all about, says God. Because I'm not about this whole palace thing, or else I would have said something.
Further, say thus to my servant David, Thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the flock, to be a ruler of my people Israel, and I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut down all your enemies before you. Moreover, I will give you great renown, like that of the greatest men on earth. I will establish a home for my people Israel, and I will plant them firm, so that they shall dwell secure and shall tremble no more. Evil men shall not oppress them any more as in the past, ever since I appointed chieftains over my people Israel. I will give you safety from all your enemies. It's not just God saying, well, you don't need to do this because I'm kind of, I'm comfortable where I am, but you also don't need to do this to get something from me, because I'm always going to be with you. I made a promise, and I'm going to keep that promise.
Well, and it's a huge promise. He's saying you're not in danger of not proving yourself great. You will be known as one of the greats of the entire world. You don't need to build this temple for your legacy. And of course, that's absolutely true. I mean, King David is one of the pivotal figures from all of human history, and is known by people of many different races and religions. But it's also God saying, this is my plan. My plan wasn't to bring you to Israel so that I could have the most magnificent temple in the world. My plan was to bring the people to Israel, to provide them security, and to provide them a place where they could be my people. That's all I've ever been looking for. That's all I've ever hoped to accomplish in this relationship. I chose you to help me do that by leading and by defending and by securing, not by building the temple, because that wasn't what was going to make us any greater than the Mishkan we already had. This is your task, and I will reward you for having done it so well. You don't need a reward for building a temple.
The Lord declares to you that He, the Lord, will establish a house for you. When your days are done and you lie with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, one of your own issue, and I will establish his kingship. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish his royal throne forever. I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. When he does wrong, I will chastise him with the rod of men and the affliction of mortals. But I will never withdraw my favor from him, as I withdrew it from Shaul, whom I removed to make room for you. Your house and your kingship shall ever be secure before you. Your throne shall be established forever. We know this, right? All the prophecies that talk about the coming Messiah say that it will be of the line of David. I think that there are several verses which explicitly speak about David himself retaking the throne. If there is a king ever in Israel, it will be a king of the Davidic line.
Correct. And the linguistic twist that happens in this section is just so beautiful, and it gets lost because we tend to think about the temple as being the temple, but in Hebrew, of course, it's a bait, right? It's Beit HaMikdash, and bait is a house. So what God is saying here is, you don't need to build a house for me. I am building a house for you. And that house for you is not one of cedar, which, yes, I know you like, and so do all the other kings in the area. The house I'm building for you is a house of eternity, of having a place within the people of Israel for all time. That's where you should be focused, is on that. And your son, yes, he'll build a house for my name and build this temple, but more importantly, I will be with him, and I will be with him and his descendants onward forever, such that this house, the house of David, will never disappear. It may never always be in rulership, unfortunately, but the line of David has continued forever, and may it speedily be reestablished in a good and beneficial way for our people.
And we finish in 17. Nathan spoke to David in accordance with all of these words and all this prophecy. In Jewish thought, I've read that there's obviously an understanding that the Mashiach, the Messiah, will come of the line of David, but I've also read thoughts that it might be David himself, that after the kind of resurrection of the dry bones, that David will take his seat on the throne again. Is that very popular thought?
No, I wouldn't call that a popular interpretation. It isn't. It does exist within a minority of opinions from the commentators, but it's definitely not the majority opinion within the normative Jewish teachings. So it's there. It exists. You can't say that it's outside the scope of Jewish thought, but it's definitely not the first interpretation that's listed. It's usually more of a footnote.
The king that is going to come is going to be a flesh and blood guy, right? And he'll have a wife, and he'll have kids, and he'll give offerings to the temple when the temple's there, and he'll do all the things that the king should do.
That's definitely the mainstream interpretation throughout Judaism for the last 2,000 plus years, and definitely one that has been the focus of our aspirations. One last thing I just want to tie in for the Torah portion is we see here at the very end God rejecting greater sacrificial glory. God could have said, "Cool, build me a temple. That'll make the sacrifices even cooler." And you might think from the God who ordered all the sacrifices that get talked about in Vayikra and Tzav and Shimini and the rest of the book of Leviticus, that bigger and better places to do the sacrifices would be what he was all about. But he's stopping that process here, or at least delaying it, and saying, no, look, it's the relationship between me and the people, between you and the people, between you and me. That's what's important. And we need the physicality of the Mishkan, of some form of sacrificial service, of some form of physical acts to make that tangible and binding. But that's not the essence. That's simply the vehicle, the wrapper around the candy bar. And let's focus on that for right now. And we can always do a building upgrade later.
And there we are, ladies and gents. That was this week's program. Thank you very much, Rabbi Neely, for your time with us again.
Thank you, Jason.
And for you guys watching, stick around to the end of the video, and you will see what we are covering in the next program. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe and tell all your friends. And we'll see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.